Glad you're all here. Tonight's going to be a very targeted discussion on 6 Mulberry Street, and if time allows, we're going to talk about housing preservation as well. Historic preservation. Thank you. We have a hard stop at 7 o'clock.
6:30.
What?
6:30.
Signing 6:30.
Oh, 6:30. Stand corrected. We have a hard stop at 6:30. So when you have questions or you have comments, again, it's going to be come up with the microphone. You're going to be limited to 3 minutes or less. If you're repeating something that's already been repeated, please don't repeat it again. But you can come and say, I'm repeating that, and that's it. Okay. All right. If you want your name on the record for repeating it. But we need no need to go into an additional dialogue and another discussion on the same subject. So we want to keep it open. We want to get as much input as we possibly can. We appreciate your comments and or suggestions, and we'll get started. Okay? So I'd like to lead off with the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's get started. We're going to do Gordon Leedy is here.
We're heavily involved with that. And we also looked at the Dutchess County Housing Assessment, which was a document that was put out I think earlier this year regarding housing needs assessment in the community. And what we found is that the demographics of Rhinebeck, as well as not unlike many other communities and areas of the state and of the United States, is getting older. So there are several things that sort of come from that. One is that household sizes get smaller generally, and if you're like me and you're sort of looking at not wanting to take care of a big yard and so forth, and your kids are grown, you may want to downsize. So there's increased demand for smaller units, smaller housing units, which in turn, when those people move out of the existing housing stock, in turn creates additional housing available for families. So there is a potential imbalance in the market demand versus the housing supply in Rhinebeck. Rhinebeck is predominantly single family, predominantly larger homes, 3 to 4 bedroom homes, on the order of 73% single family homes. And it's also predominantly, those single family homes are predominantly owner occupied. So there's a very low vacancy rate for housing, for rental housing. There's also a very low supply of single family homes. So with that imbalance in mind, there's a strong likelihood that there are several boxes that are going to be kind of put forward as a part for checking as a part of the comprehensive plan process that's currently underway. Those are housing supply issues, housing affordability issues, diversity of housing stock, walkability and sustainability within the community, and historic preservation in the community. So with this project, or the 6 Mulberry Street parcel, there's an opportunity to talk about adaptive reuse of an existing historic building. The site is within the historic district of the village. It is, while while it wasn't a contributing structure in the original nomination forms, it is a contributing structure now and has been adopted as such by the state. And and you do have a preservation ordinance. So the proponent is discussing the ability to remove some later additions to the existing school building, maintaining the historic integrity of the quite attractive brick, main brick building that was the original school, and using that building as a home for 9 multifamily apartments, half of which will be accessible or handicap accessible, which is another kind of characteristic of housing that is in short supply in Rhinebeck. And then in addition, there would be several, perhaps as many as 4 single-family houses that would be sited on individual lots, consistent with the development pattern that is in the rest of the neighborhood. So what we have found through our analysis is that the density of that proposed development is not markedly different than the existing pattern of development in the neighborhood. There is the ability, as you might be aware, to do accessory dwelling units for like smaller apartments as a part of a single-family property under a special permit from the town or from the village. So the overall density is not markedly different than what would be allowed under a special permit. And so, therefore, the potential impacts of the development would be similar or somewhat less than what might be expected to be from 7 single-family homes that could otherwise be built on the property. And so, generally, I think what we have found is that those issues of housing supply, diversity and affordability, walkability in the community, and multimodal access to residential units from the village center, as well as preservation of historic character of our neighborhoods, will likely be coming out of the comprehensive planning process, and we should have a larger discussion about how this proposal may fit into those goals.
Thank you.
Be willing to entertain any questions you might have.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'll sit down and listen to you proceedings.
So our goal this evening is to get your input. I'm not sure we're going to be able to respond unless the board member feels so inclined, or Nico has now joined us, seems so inclined to want to respond to your question. But it's really generated to get a sense from the community about 6 Mulberry Street. So if you want to, if you have a question or a concern or whatever, raise your hand, I'll identify you, and you can come up to the podium and speak. John.
Hi.
Hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good evening. My name is John Lyons. I'm a land use lawyer with the firm of Grant and Lyons here in Rhinebeck. I'm here this evening representing 9 different parties. I'm representing Diane and Victor Britton, Linda Christensen, Sarah and Steve Miller, Spiro Chumas and Vicky Hack, John Bagwell and William Harris. And all of my clients live in close proximity to the property that's proposed to be rezoned. I'm going to try to confine my the remarks to 3 minutes, Mr. Mayor, but if I go a little bit over, I'm speaking for 9 people, so I hope you'll help me. I'm not going to be long. You've been presented with a question by this zoning amendment request, and you want to make the right decision, and I see you trying to make the right decision for the community. And in order to try to do that, you went out and it's not an easy decision. You want to make a decision that's fair to the applicant, but by the same time, you're understanding that as representatives, elected representatives of the community, you have a duty and responsibility to the community and those community members who will be most impacted by this project. And those are folks who have lived in this community and have contributed to the community for a long time. And I also think that you understand that the applicant bought this property with its eyes open, knowing that the project that they envisioned for the property wasn't allowed by the zoning law, and that you understand that it's not the responsibility of the village board to make this project work for the applicant's sake. So knowing the decision was important, you asked for help, you got help from Mr. Leedy, you provided for an opportunity for comment tonight, and I'm grateful to the board for having the opportunity to speak, and also for the fact that you're taking the question seriously and you're trying to get some input from other voices and expert voices. I have to say that unfortunately our group was quite disappointed with Mr. Leedy's report. We found that the conclusions that in the report are largely based on assumptions or presumptions about the comp plan process and how that will turn out. And the fact of the matter is that none of us know how it's going to turn out. That's something that lies in the future, and the process itself is only right now at the very formative stages. We were also disappointed in the depth of the report and the scope of the analysis in the report. We felt that it ignored many of the issues that we think the board needs to be considering as making its decision on
So
this.
John,
I think because it's giving for 9 people.
what? Yeah, I know. So I want to get a sense of how many people want to have their voices heard, right? Because I'm more than willing to let you speak if if not everybody in the room wants to have a voice as well. So, yeah, I mean, how much longer do you need?
About another 3 minutes.
Are you guys okay with that?
Yes.
All right. I'm trying to be fair to everybody.
Understood, and I'm grateful. I want to cover the things I want to say without kind of zipping through it, though. But I'm about halfway. So we looked at Mr. Leedy's report, and in order to fill the gaps, in order to try to be useful to the process and useful to you, we engaged our own planner, Nan Stolzenberg from Community Planning and Environmental Associates. Nan is an AICP planner with 30 years of experience, and over the course of her career, she's worked in 70 different communities in New York State, and she specializes in providing planning advice to communities that are small and rural. And Nan did an in-depth analysis of the proposal that's been made by Duchess Shepherd, and she generated an analysis and a report for us that we'll provide to you this evening. And our hope is that it'll help you think about this question in an effective way and consider the full scope of the issues that need to be considered in order to make a good decision. I'm really here to deliver Nan's report for you. Nan was not able to be here because of a family obligation. And I'm just going to touch on, you'll find that Nan's report is very detailed. It really just lays things out in a very clear fashion. We'll just touch quickly on some of the things that she discusses. And we talked about the fact that we were concerned about the fact that many of the conclusions in Mr. Lee's report were based on assumptions. We think that there are other issues that should be been considered as part of the analysis, and Nan's report spells that out. We are not advocating that the board, the question that's in front of the board is one about timing. Should this be entertained, this zoning amendment question be entertained now, or should we wait until the comp plan process comes to fruition? And I think what we're advocating is a middle ground. We don't think that it's necessary to wait for the comp plan to be finished, but we do think that before you can effectively make a decision on this question, that you need to let the comp plan committee assess and collect some of the information that goes directly to this question, and have that done first before you really start making a decision about this application. And Nan spells out what that information is and where it's going. And finally, Nan also took a look at the proposal, and there's a critique of the proposal, and there's a lot of missing information, key information that you should have when you're thinking about this process, and that's spelled out in her report. There's also finally a roadmap for the board that discusses process and the procedural ways that you should go about considering the questions, looking at the environmental impacts, and then how this fits together with the site plan, the special use permit review that would have to happen in front of the planning board. So I'm going to hand up to you two documents. I'm at the end of my remarks. And one of them is Nan's report, which she authorized me to deliver tonight. The other one is something that she would be probably angry about me submitting, but it's a copy of, she was recently this year appointed a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners, and the press release for that is attached to the report, just so you can learn more about her qualifications. Yes, yeah, and I'll send Martina a PDF of the report later. So we would ask you, please continue listening and continue taking this seriously, and please take a hard look at Nan's report. A lot of work went into that in collaboration with our clients. It reflects our views on things, and I think it offers a lot of helpful guidance for you going forward. Thanks for being so liberal with me on the time. I appreciate it.
John.
John, can I ask you a quick question?
Excuse me?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. I'm Lydia Slavin. We haven't yet met.
Yeah.
Would it ever be a possibility for you and or not your clients to sit down with the developer's attorney and have a meeting to talk through the concerns without us playing monkey in the middle on some of the more detailed aspects of their plan?
Yeah, actually, that's something that already happened.
Oh, great.
After the last village board meeting, we did, and my clients can speak to you, I was not present at the meeting. I suggested to them that it was the kind of meeting that was best had without having lawyers in there.
Usually it's,
Let people talk like regular Homo sapiens. But my clients reached out to the developer, and they did have a meeting, and I think they did talk about a wide range of things. I don't think anything was resolved, but they're definitely open to talking, and we're open to a continuation of that dialogue.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Just to follow up, our group did meet with David Ruff and Nate Freeman. I don't see
Mike, very tall, and Mike was very short. Sorry.
That was to go into the speakers.
You need to pick it up.
Is it on?
Which one is going to
They're both, turn them both on, I'll turn the speakers up.
People.
Here through Thursday.
Can you hear me?
I think it's the other one.
The other mic, the other mic.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So our group did meet with Nate Friedman and David Roth. It was a very informal, casual meeting. We did not want any lawyers there. We wanted to just establish some communication. It was very cordial. We got to a nice place. Yeah, and we're willing to keep talking. So that's in response to your question. I have a very short statement here. From the very beginning of this process, back when Duchess Shepherd presented their first proposal in May 2021, people have asked me or my group, what do you want? I can and have always been able to answer that clearly. I want a development that integrates into the existing fabric of our village. Trustees, I urge you to thoroughly read Nancy Stoltenberg's letter and comprehend all the issues with the Duchess Shepherd proposal before making your decision on rezoning the 6 Mulberry Street parcel. Thank you.
May I speak? I'm not
Yeah.
resident, may I speak?
Okay, yes, come on. It's an open meeting.
The right one or the left one?
Either one.
One to your right.
That's right.
I'm Sue Hartshorn, I am a resident of the town. But just one quick question. The information in Nan's report, I assume, is proprietary. Once it's been given to the village board, will it be put on the website and shared with the community?
I think it should be, though.
I would say yes.
Thanks, John.
And assuming because John's handing it out, that it's not proprietary, so
Yeah, we have actually 25 copies here to,
Great.
for anyone who's
we'll put it on the website, and then if we have a digital copy of it. Do we have like a folder?
Here you go.
Yeah, I just have a very brief comment on Deirdre Byrne, I live on Chestnut Street, which is, I just haven't heard the word affordability said. So in all the public meetings thus far related to the comprehensive plan, deep concerns about affordability are always mentioned. So I think as part of permitting rezoning for this parcel, there should be a requirement for units in the building, the apartment units, to be affordable and also perhaps even one of the individual single homes. So I think that's crucial, and it would be because of the board not to require some measure of affordability of the project.
Yes, sir.
Hi.
My name is Ron Culver. I'm a resident of South Street. I'm also a registered architect. And I have one question about the planning report that you've done. You said that this parcel, which is approximately 4 acres, is...
No, 1.4.
I'm sorry, oops. What I don't understand is when you said it's similar in density to other areas in the community, and I would like to know what lots, areas you're referring to that it's similar to, because to my knowledge, there isn't any density in this area. And the other question I have is, I think the statement was made that some of the units, maybe 9 or 8, were ADA compliant, and I believe the law now reads that all units must be compliant. So those are just two issues that I don't quite understand in the report, and I'd like to see that, or understand. That's all, thank you.
Joanne?
Joanne Gale, Mulberry Street. I heard you mention that by building these units, you were going to help with the lack of housing inventory in Rhinebeck. So, and then you spoke about people downsizing. So are these units going to only be for Rhinebeck residents who are downsizing? Okay, so does that help with the housing inventory? I don't get it. So, all right, I can leave that question. I don't understand because time and again, I heard that this is not a contributing building. Michael Frazier, the historian, said it's not. Did something change?
Stay tuned. What changed was the 2021 federal district. So when the federal government, state and federal government expanded the Rhinebeck Village Historic District, we're going to have if we have time, we're going to have a presentation on that after this.
Yeah.
There were a series of things that happened as part of that expansion that changed basically, yes, it is now a contributing building in the federal historic district, which has now made some complications with our local laws. But it is a contributing building according to the state and federal government.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the accessibility? You're saying that it's a two-floor building?
Actually,
Three.
So you'll have an elevator?
I don't.
Joanne?
So just to be clear, we're not
Yeah.
developers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't, he's the planner that was
Yeah.
hired to analyze the developer's report. He's not the developer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So questions about,
Questions about the actual development, we can try to answer.
okay, how can you have ADA, handicap accessible on second or third floor without an elevator? I don't
I
understand.
believe there's an elevator proposed to be in the building.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you shake your head, yes or no?
No. Want me to answer that question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is a three-story structure. There's one unit in the basement, 4 units on the ground floor, and 4 units on the second floor. There are accessibility ramps. Ramps have to be code compliant for wheelchair access, so they don't roll one way or another. Those accessibility ramps are designed in the building to provide accessible access to 5 of the 9 units. 4 on the ground floor and 1 unit on the basement level. The 4 units on the second floor are not accessible to a wheelchair. They are compliant and ADA compliant from the point of view of clear floor areas, doorway openings, distances to the left and right of pull and push side doors, so they have that level of compliance. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, okay. Am I yelling? Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to shout at anyone. And so that is how the building is organized. Does that clarify your question?
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be more talk about this because I still am a little unsure why to make it wheelchair-wide doors on a floor that you can't get to by an elevator.
So it's a good question. Compliance and accessibility is not only an issue of being in a wheelchair, right? There are many issues, many accessible issues that have nothing to do with either someone who is either physically in need or elderly or in any other scenario that we can think of that would need an accessible apartment, or a dwelling unit. So it is, the accessible laws and the ADA compliance laws are not designed only for wheelchair considerations.
Okay. And I just want to say respectfully that I've been a little uncomfortable about the timing of everything. From during COVID, finding out that we're now a state or federal historic house, and what does that mean, to a new comprehensive plan and this particular project. I don't know, the timing, maybe if I talk more or listen more to you guys, I'll feel a little better about it. Thank you.
Hi, John.
I'm John Clark. I live in the village. I'm also on the village planning board, so I'm just speaking for myself. And because this may end up, some version of this may end up before the planning board, I'm going to talk generally and not about this project in particular. Generally speaking, I really strongly believe in adaptive use of historic buildings, not tearing down historic buildings. This building is historic, by any means, I think it is. I have a lot of experience in historic preservation, and I would have certainly rated it as historic and contributing. The applicant's proposal, however, I don't want to talk detail about it, but it's for an overlay district for one parcel. And you really should never do that. You should never do an overlay district for potentially multiple parcels. So you're not doing one particular favor for one particular developer. So if you're going to do an overlay district, it should be an affordable housing overlay district or a historic preservation overlay district in which you can apply whatever rules you come up with to multiple parcels so that it just doesn't apply to one individual project. So I do believe there's other multifamily housing in the village. This isn't intensive density what we're talking about here. There's apartments right on South Street, multiple apartments on South Street. There's apartments that are left over. Apartments, multifamily were taken away in 2001 zoning. Before that, you could have multifamily in the residential district, and the lot sizes were much smaller. So there's a legacy of mixed, diverse housing types in the village that are slowly being eliminated because they changed the zoning to single-family zoning only in 2001. And so a lot of the two-family and three-family houses that were out there are being transformed to single-family housing, and we're getting less and less diverse in our housing stock. So generally speaking, I'm on the comprehensive plan as well, everything we've heard is about affordability, diversity, multiple options, and making the village more welcoming to all different types of people rather than just wealthy people who can afford a big single-family house. So generally speaking, I would support the adaptive reuse of this building. And if there's going to be an overlay zone, I think it should apply to multiple parcels and be capable of type multiple parcels. Thank you.
Darren, can I ask John a question?
Sure.
Take it per minute. My instinct from the beginning was to subordinate the developer's proposed labeling of this proposal as an overlay district, partly for the reasons that you're mentioning. I didn't think it was helpful, and I didn't think it described what they were doing. I've basically told the board that as far as I was concerned, this is just a rezoning proposal for this parcel to be able to do the adaptive reuse. So if we forget about the word overlay, how does your analysis of it change? If we just say this is a unique type of a situation, they want to rezone this particular parcel, it's not really an overlay for the reasons that you've mentioned, and how do you then approach the zoning issue at that point?
It's also not good for them to zone one particular parcel individually. It's generally known as spot zoning. If it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, it's legal, but our comprehensive plan is 30 years old. So I just don't think it's good for them to zone one parcel for a proposal by one particular developer or property owner. I would think that it would be better if you assumed in an overlay district that it could have allowed multiple parcels for the same sorts of projects in other places.
And East Market Street, Rhinebeck. I have one question for Mr. Levy, if I might. So in your introduction, you stated that you were tasked with identifying how this project would impact the neighboring parcels. In your conversations with the homeowners that are surrounding the property, what did you glean from that?
You said you would take some questions.
Absolutely.
So please do.
I was looking at that not from conversations with homeowners, because we did not do that. I was looking at it from more of a physical planning perspective.
Without acknowledging, as Mr. Lyons had expressed, the impact that it would have on the, South Street, East Market Street, Mulberry Street, and the surrounding community.
Well, I mean, from a zoning perspective, from a planning perspective, there are, in any given district, there are allowed uses, and there are conditional uses, there might be uses by special permit. All of those are contemplated as having, there are criteria for, if it's not an allowed use, then there are criteria for accepting those uses. We looked at, I looked at the specifics of the neighborhood in terms of what kinds of uses exist, and it's predominantly single-family homes. There may be some, I'm talking about the existing neighborhood. It's predominantly single-family homes. There are several institutional uses. There are, including this school, and also churches and so forth. And the uses that are proposed as a part of, the fact is that the existing building is and has been a part of the neighborhood, the fabric of the neighborhood. So to the degree that that building is not going to be increased in any way, in fact, it's going to be proposed to be decreased in its footprint, and there are additional single-family homes which are completely consistent with the development pattern in the neighborhood, and as the developer has proposed, would be constructed on lots that are consistent with your existing land use regulations. Then, I found that this use was not inconsistent and would not have an undue burden on the neighborhood. Now, certainly there are issues that are outside of the scope of zoning decisions, like the SECRA environmental impact analysis and site plan approvals that would come in addition to the zoning process. So there are plenty of bites at the apple to discuss specific property impacts. But right now, we're talking about whether the use in this instance is an appropriate one. And for the reasons that were articulated by the planning board member, I'm completely in support of adaptive reuse of existing buildings as well. And in this case, this building has been a part of this neighborhood for 30 years, so.
Since 1930.
Since 1930.
Yeah. Almost 90 years.
70 years. Well, and just so we all understand why it wasn't included in the original designation. The original designation, it was, I believe, happened in 1970.
Yeah, it originally happened in 1979, and the cutoff was 1930, and this part of this building was built in 1931.
Right. So it was 1 year short of being considered a historic structure under the National Park Service rules. So when they reevaluated and renominated, it was included and was accepted as a contributing structure. Does that answer your question?
Yes, way in the back. Oh, Diane.
Diane.
Good to see you.
Is it my, sorry.
Hi, I'm Diane Britton, I live on 34 South Street. Just a couple of points. Lydia, when you talk about, the federal government expanding the district, I just want to make it clear that everyone knows that's because we asked them to.
Yeah.
We submitted forms, it was an active part on the town, the village. I am also okay with adaptive reuse. I know there's a perception that many of the neighbors in South Street wanted the building torn down. At one point, we did submit some letters asking for that, but that was because we understood that was what the developer wanted, and we were trying to support the developer in that tear down. Most of us have moved beyond that now, and we're fine with having that building reused. I would also ask, in addition to reading Nan's letter, she's very well known, she's very well respected. The other thing I ask that you look at is some data that's being collected by both the Housing Subcommittee and Donna Warner as part of her work. There's a lot of information about single-family ownership and what those rates are. A lot of information about affordability and people that are being challenged right now to stay in Rhinebeck or live in Rhinebeck. And so I think you can probably get access to that data before everything is wrapped up with the comprehensive plan. As to density in the neighborhood, I think if there was a study done that would look at any 1.6 acre parcel on our section of Rhinebeck, that you'll find that the proposal is overly dense compared to the surrounding houses. I think that's another piece of work that you might want to do. There are many multifamilies on South Street. Most of them are integrated in the neighborhood. They look like houses. They have a front porch. They have green space around them. If you look at the developer's proposal, it's missing a lot of green space for 9 units that are either family or even 1 or 2 people. It would be nice to have a place to go and have a barbecue outside, or sit outside with your friends, or have a front porch. Right now, there's no front of the building facing Mulberry Street. It's on the side. It sort of doesn't fit in. It's not integrated into the neighborhood. And when we use that, that's really what we're talking about. More green space around the building, more places for the people that live there to be able to go outside and enjoy outside as well. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Anyone there?
Linda Christensen, 37 South Street. I'm going to take a little different tack like I usually do, and say that I was disappointed with the lack of advance notice of this change of time for this meeting. I have to say, though, to the public, I'm very impressed. It's at a very inconvenient time at 5 o'clock. When we've had others, I've spoken up at the meeting to say 5 o'clock doesn't allow for a full discourse. If this were just the discussion it was presented to be, a discussion about 6 Mulberry Street, that would be fine. But now this is the legal hearing. This is going to be, you've satisfied your requirement.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is not.
Well, Mayor Bassett's newsletter today said you're required to have this legal.
If we go into a zoning, that was in reference to if we go to a zoning amendment.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's not. So we will have another public hearing and people that weren't able to make it.
If we have to change law, we have to go through that process.
Right, as long as this isn't it, I'm happy.
Not it.
Good. Okay, you've saved yourself from my disappointment. Okay, anyway, that's about it. I think that everyone that has spoken so far has expressed most of what I feel about this. The only thing, in fact, Diane covered that. There are a number of multifamily housing on South Street with a good number, and yet they look like Victorian houses. They're lovely, they fit into the neighborhood, they have gardens. And so I would really like to emphasize that for this property as well. Thank you.
we've had a lot of input from the public, and we haven't commented really, we haven't drafted anything, we haven't said anything. So there's like a whole process that has to happen after this, if the village board chooses to go ahead with any kind of zoning amendment in response to this. Everything that's been happening up until now doesn't usually happen with a zoning amendment. Usually what happens is a law is drafted and then the public is given an opportunity to comment on it. And so this is all preamble in a lot of ways. So just so you understand the legal requirements of this process.
We've always done it this way, by the way.
We have, but it is also preamble.
Yeah, I just want to explain, to be clear, what's going on. If we had a comprehensive plan, let's say in the last few years, and this had come up, then the way this would have been processed would be that we would go through a zoning hearing, we would hear from you on the rezoning, and we would have to determine, because this isn't essentially a rezoning of an individual parcel, the two things, whether it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, and also whether it's going to impact the neighborhood. And that would also be subject to seeker, that rezoning consideration, we'd hold a hearing on it, and then also the planning board, of course, would get a crack at it on site plan approval. What we're doing now is preliminary to all that, because we don't have a recent comprehensive plan, and of course we have a comprehensive plan committee, so the front-loaded question is whether we should even do this now, because it's a rezoning, and usually you do that consistent with the comprehensive plan, whether we can do this now essentially by anticipating what the issues would be for the comprehensive plan committee and what would come out of it ultimately in order to move this along, or whether we'd have to wait a year or two until we get a comprehensive plan. That's essentially the purpose that we asked Ty and Bond to come up with a preliminary opinion. That's what we're discussing now. So there will be numerous more public meetings and public hearings on the rezoning, on the seeker analysis, and on the site plan review. And that is in addition to whatever else comes out of this process, just to see whether we accept the developer's invitation to even begin that regular land use process. So this is all quite preliminary in terms of the discussion and listening to you.
Jeff, you had a question?
Yeah.
You gonna film yourself?
Thank you. I'm Jeff Christensen. I'm also on the planning board like John, but I want to make very clear, as John did, I'm speaking as a resident. No one represents the planning board. So this project and the statements that were made that the proposed project is consistent with the density of the existing village, I have to take issue with. This proposal, and as you pointed out, the existing code would allow 7 single-family dwellings on 1.4 acres. This proposal would allow 17 dwellings on 1.4 acres. And with all due respect, that's a preposterous statement to say that it's consistent with the rest of the village. I do agree with Deirdre and several others that believe we have to do something serious about affordable housing. It's going to be a long haul, it's going to take a lot of people that understand things and a lot of work, but we need to address that issue. And I hope, we don't know yet, what the results of the comprehensive plan will be, but I personally hope that we have to end up dealing with affordable housing. I also agree with, I think, some of the statements Diane made, that there's not enough green space, etc. John Clark's point about making an overlay that's directed to affordable housing, I think is also sensible, and I hope that comes out of a comprehensive, serious affordable housing effort. Thank you.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, just very quickly.
Come up to the podium. Don't trip, though, please.
Don't break my arm. Don't sing as a microphone. I did not like that. I'm not born at 23 Beach Street, and I did not come tonight to plan to say anything, but I do just want to make a plea for data. Because we have a lot of people working on a lot of census data. It's very complicated, and housing data, multiple sources, and I keep hearing all kinds of things that don't mesh, and I think we really need to hold ourselves accountable for when we cite things. You know, there's a lot of, I heard just one thing, maybe I misheard it, that we have a lot of big houses. You know, I think we need to document, footnote, cite the source, and we all need to eventually come together with one data set that helps us truly understand what the mix of housing is in this village, what kinds of housing, how much affordable housing we do have. That came up in one of the kitchen table conversations.
That's my thing, I want to inventory how much we do have.
And this, people are working on this. We can't get ahead of ourselves, I think, until we get all of the data together. The other is that I'm hearing about needs of people like myself who want to downsize, but I also think we need to understand what the whole cluster of needs is, and by whom and at what levels of income and affordability. The word affordability, and again, we've done a lot of kitchen table conversations, we're getting a sense of all kinds of people with questions about affordability, their own ability to afford, and it's across the spectrum. So I just want to, again, encourage us to try to come up with a common data set that we can all reference and be talking about the same thing. Thank you.
Do you have an idea how long it's going to take to develop?
Again, questions?
Rick is asking me comprehensive plan questions.
Yes, do you have any idea how long it's going to take to develop what could be this shared data center?
The goal is to have the data that's coming out of the comprehensive plan of the existing conditions of the village to be within a month and a half. And then, yeah, to answer your question, month and a half. And then we should have data on the public outreach that we're doing, the kitchen table conversations, as Donna just mentioned, all sorts of public forums, vision and values meetings, as well as the survey, which will be coming out sometime in the next couple of weeks. We should have all of that data by the end of December at the latest. So we'll have a lot of data before the end of the year, is the goal of the comprehensive plan today. You're welcome.
Any other input, questions, thoughts on 6 Mulberry Street? Wait. Well, Don, you raise your hand again?
Oh, gosh.
You want to come on and speak more? No. Okay. I will thank you, appreciate it. Your input is always invaluable for us. So, and we take these discussions seriously and hopefully, useful for this board to make decisions. All right, so we're going to now shift gears and talk a little bit about historic preservation.
Specifically the historic districts. Oh, God. All right, hear me out. Are we there? Okay. Okay, the next topic on the agenda
Can
is...
you wait until, if anybody wants to leave, they leave, because we
Yeah.
can't hear back here.
Yeah, no problem. Can you, wait, sorry. All right. Can you hear me through this very sensitive microphone? Okay. So we're having this conversation now instead of at the end of the comprehensive plan committee work, because in the last couple of years, due to the new federal district, there's been elevated to me frustration from those who are in favor of historic preservation about the fact that we haven't expanded the Village Historic District overlay. Confusion from planning board members as well as the building planning and zoning office itself about the scope of the planning board's authority over historic properties at the moment. Confusion from property owners about what rules apply to them. You just heard a little bit from Joan Gale on that one. And this feels like an increasingly untenable status quo. And so what I wanted to do was present the board and the public who's here with what we're dealing with and the questions that we need to start figuring out how to answer. So how did we get here? In 1979, the Rhinebeck Village Historic District was listed on the National Register. All of these historic districts come about because of, as Linda pointed out, a local ask to do something like this. But the end result is that in 1979, in August of 1979, the original historic district was created. 30 years later, the Village of Rhinebeck passed 2 laws to protect the buildings in the 1979 district, including adopting the district as the historic district overlay. So it's important to note that these 2 laws that the village passed are the only reason that there's any kind of oversight on buildings in a historic district. Individually listed buildings have a whole series of hoops that they have to jump through with the federal government and the state government if they want to do anything to them. But simple buildings that contribute to a historic district are only protected by the strength of local zoning laws. So, and it's important to note that of those 2 laws that we passed, one of them refers explicitly to any future changes in the historic district at the state or federal level, while the other one only references the 1979 map. So at the moment we have one law that is only referencing the 1979 map, and one law that says this law will evolve as new historic districts are put into place. So the decisions that we need to make up here is, do we want our laws to reference the same historic district definition? And if so, which one? So the 2 laws that we're talking about are Chapter 64, the Historic Building Protections, which is the guidelines for the demolition of historic buildings. And then in our zoning code, Chapter 120-39, which created the historic district overlay, which gives the planning board oversight over the historic district. Questions? Feel free to interrupt me.
In Chapter 64, historic building means simply a contributing building, not an actual. It's when I keep my definitions clean.
We can have that conversation in a moment,
All right.
Rick.
That could be this right now.
Yep. And so then the question is, which I've run through this PowerPoint with Vanessa earlier today, so she's more up to speed on it than Vanessa. So if we want our laws to reference the same historic district definition, then it kind of depends. If we want the old district boundaries and criteria to govern, we have to amend Chapter 64. If we want the new district, the boundaries and criteria to govern, then we have to amend 120. And if we also want to avoid similar confusion in the future, we should also clarify Chapter 64. And if we want either the boundaries or the criteria that are different from either the 1979 or the 2021 district, then we have to amend both chapters. So this is kind of the issue that we're facing at the moment. To be clear, we have been told by professional planners, in addition to the State Historic Preservation Office, that local historic districts should follow, this is what the planning professionals have told us, that local historic districts should follow state and federal historic districts. And according to the State Historic Preservation Office, at the moment, ours is the only district that they can think of that currently doesn't follow state and federal historic districts. So, there we are. The option that best achieves this is option 2. Now, what are we talking about? So here are the 2 districts. I apologize that the maps aren't exactly the same. That's the picture of the districts. It might be easier to sort of see it here. So the 1979 district is what we know as the historic district. It streets mostly east of the Post Road, which is Route 9, on Montgomery, Livingston, Chestnut Center, Mulberry, Parsonage, Chestnut, and South Street. It's 319 contributing properties, but 334 total properties. And it epitomized the design, feeling, and association of the Hudson Valley in the quote-unquote romantic era. And the period of significance is everything until 1930, basically. The expanded historic district captures Oak Street and by extension West Chestnut Street, Platte Avenue, and the 2 intersecting streets there, as well as Mill Street. Mill Street was added to bring the Astor Home for Children, which was individually listed in 1987, into the Rhinebeck Historic District. To be clear, there are 3 properties in the village that are individually listed. One is the Henry Delmater House at 215 Montgomery Street. It's been on the National Register since 1973. There's the Astor Home, and then there's the post office, which was listed in 1989. The 2021 district adds the African American and Irish American Oak Street neighborhood, which is mostly prior to 1930 and for some reason was not included in 1979. The growth of the violet industry within the village, that's the Platte Street part of it, as well as post-war residential and commercial development within the village, which captures a whole bunch of areas. That one adds 103 contributing buildings and all sorts of other things. And it also increases the period of significance from 1930 to 1970. So what that does is it not only adds buildings up to 1970 in the expanded boundary area, but it also captures buildings like the Father Brogan Center, which missed out on the period of significance in the first district, but exist inside the boundaries of the first district, that are now considered contributing by the federal government because of the period of significance is now to 1970. This new expanded historic district brings the total number of contributing properties to 573. A contributing property is one that exemplifies the quality of what the district is trying to preserve. A building that was built prior to 1970 could be non-contributing because of extensive renovations or deterioration or otherwise. So that's how a contributing property functions.
Mostly based upon how much change it's endured over the years.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
That's not the primary.
Yeah, or if, it was allowed to molder and fall apart and all the rest of it, it's half there.
So there's no aesthetic decision involved. It's simply an age. It's a change to age.
Yeah. Well, and what it does is, that is an interesting question. So we had a historic district working group that was helping me think through some of these issues with this, and we had a big conversation at one point about the difference between historic significance and aesthetic significance. Historians don't take into account aesthetic significance because aesthetic significance is by its nature a personal preference. For example, the FBI building in Washington, D.C., which is a spectacular example of the brutalist movement, is generally not considered to be aesthetically very pretty, but it's an incredibly historic building. The reason why we went up to 1970 is that's the general criteria for when things become historic. You give it 50 years. So, I know, 1970 was 50 years ago, and we all clutched our seats a little bit. Yeah, and it's funny. I actually did my thesis in college on the National Register of Historic Places because that's what people do when they have a liberal arts degree. And the buildings that are usually most threatened are ones that are on the border of anywhere from 40 to 60 years old. Because people like us sit here and go, there is no way that a split level from the 1960s is historic. And so what happens is all of those assets are lost before they're given an opportunity to stick around, basically. It's interesting, actually, when a lot of the Victorian architecture was going in the village, we were tearing down, the people who lived here were tearing down Federalist architecture. So we've lost a lot of our brick buildings that you see throughout the Hudson Valley because they were considered, shabby and old and not interesting, and Victorian architecture was preferred. So, you see this happening time and time and time and time again. There's a couple of things here. Platt Street is actually a really interesting example of a mix of the older, larger, grander homes that were mixed in with a lot of that. Platt Street is where a lot of the greenhouses were with violets, and there was a lot of worker housing around it on Mulberry, and as well as on Platt, across the street on Platt. And after the Second World War, a lot of those greenhouses were torn down and post-war housing was put up. So that's why we have the mix of housing that we have on Platt Street. Really interesting little history right there. If those buildings were left torn down, you lose an aspect of that history. So this is the purpose of historic districts. Is you can walk through the village of Rhinebeck and you can literally see it evolve physically. But here we have the big problem that we're dealing with is Chapter 64 is a little bit in conflict with itself, but it says that we need to, that a contributing building is anything listed in a federal district, so that would presume the 2021 historic district. It also says that a contributing building is anything built prior to 1930. So Chapter 64 needs to be amended, to be clarified, because any lawyer could argue that both ways, and we wouldn't have any idea what the appropriate answer is. And as a result of that confusion, anytime a zoning or a planning law is confusing, you send it to the planning board. So the default way of handling that is to give the planning board authority over it. So right now, all contributing buildings in the 2021 historic district, we are carefully sending to the planning board whenever they ask for a demolition permit. That being said, the areas, Oak Street, West Chestnut, Platt Avenue, Mill Street, etc., they do not have oversight by the planning board for 120-39 because they're not in the 1979 map. So we're doing a bit of a dance at the planning board and the planning, building and zoning office on which properties we send to the planning board, which properties we don't send to the planning board. It's very confusing for property owners. And that's where we are. That's my just the facts presentation.
Could I
Yes.
give you a little legislative history?
Yeah.
So 12039, the historic district overlay, about 10, 11 years ago, we passed that. And
2009, yeah.
it was my idea to actually remove non-contributing buildings from that definition. So and that was, when we did that, I voted for it.
Okay.
So it originally applied, this is when you make a material exterior alteration to your home. This isn't the demolition code. We actually passed that it would only apply to contributing buildings within our historic district. When we redid the code in 2016, 2017,
yeah, you got rid of
we removed that contributing building thing, so it applies to all.
Which is nice, because that way new construction in the historic district has planning board.
Well, new construction is treated a little different. I think in the sentence, new construction would actually require the approval of the planning board.
Yeah.
But the non-contributing buildings did not, but now it does. However, the criteria in the historic district overlay for exterior alterations talks about tall windows, it talks about the features that you had
Right,
during the age of significance.
right.
So it doesn't fit the Brady Bunch 1970 house.
It doesn't, and the thoughts from, I've spoken to Michelle Gregg, the planner for the comprehensive plan committee about this, and I was like, how do other communities handle this? And she said, other communities have basically, I'm gonna get this phrase wrong, it's like a lookbook, where it's, you know, all of the different architectural styles that are to be found in that community, and, you know, what makes those architectural styles what they are. And so if we're faced with a Victorian home, then, you know, you flip to that part of the lookbook, and it tells you, you know, windows taller than they are wide, and 2/2s ideally, because we're in Rhinebeck, and lots of curlicues and doodads, and maybe a fun color. But there's very official words for all of them. And, you know, for something like, you know, a post-war, you know, more modern house, that criteria obviously would be different. And so this is the issue that we're facing. Do we amend? Do we not amend?
Well, we did,
Do we think that?
we can tailor our definition. I mean, we could change, change 3 or 4 sentences in both of these.
Yeah.
And
solve the problem.
What we want to do, right?
Exactly, yeah.
As far as expanding, you know, to Oak Street and Platt and Mulberry in some form or another, I think it's a good idea. The question is, do we think the character of the village was from the original age of significance? We can also do that too. We can actually just say it's for those structures.
Yeah.
In the expanded
Yeah.
part, but maybe not in the original part. I mean, we can do all sorts of things.
Do whatever we want. You know, I'm trying to, I'm going to slip into opinion now that I've given you the facts, I'm going to slip into opinion. I think that having the only buildings that we preserve, ones that, you know, let's just, the Victorian buildings or the Queen Anne's or the up to 1930s buildings, I think we run the danger of becoming a Disney World where all we look like is those buildings. We lose diversity. We lose diversity of architecture. We lose diversity of building style. And I think in some respects, and I'm thinking specifically of Platt here, there are a lot of very small homes on very large parcels on Platt. And we're doing a lot of thinking at the Comprehensive Plan Committee at the moment about affordable housing. And one of the things that can be done that in some respects was undone in 2001 when they expanded the minimum lot size from 3,500 square feet to 8,000 square feet is lot sizes got bigger, houses could get bigger. And in some respects, if we can protect some of these smaller houses, then that keeps some of those houses on very desirable streets affordable. I think Oak Street absolutely should be preserved. It has a tremendous history that is not the usual history that we talk about when we're talking about European white men. And I think it's a super important street to the village. And, you know, I just think nobody wants to live in Disney World. Well, I don't want to live in Disney World. And I'm not coming at that from the perspective of someone who grew up in a city. Like, I think it's interesting when you're walking down the street and you see different styles of house. I do think it's important to have a planning board have a lot of authority and oversight over these properties to make sure nothing is horribly out of congruence. And that's generally what they do is, well, what do your neighbors look like? And how does this work? And that's kind of how Platt Street would work, right? Like, you know, there's a lovely Victorian example of Platt Street. There's some really interesting mid-century modern properties there as well. You know, so it's sort of like, okay, like what does this little mixing bowl over here actually look like, and what do you want to do? And let's talk about it.
120-39 is the real purpose of it is to, you know, be consistent with the older styles. I mean, the older style could be now 1970 now. I mean, is that what you want? I mean, that what you're...
That's what I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for for two reasons. One, to keep life simpler, but with the federal historic district. Well, more than two reasons. Two, we did ask for this expansion. The village asked for it, and we didn't just ask for it on Oak Street, we also asked for it on Platt, and
It was, we asked for it in 2019.
we asked for it in 2018, and the report was done in 2019, half paid for by a grant, and then 2020, and then 2021. So the David Millers and the Mike Frasers of our community feel very strongly that, we're not just a community of pre-1930 buildings, we're a community of, vernacular worker architecture as well. And I think there's something to be said for that. And there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting moment right now to be thinking about historic preservation and what that means vis-a-vis the affordable housing crisis that we're in. So that's really what I'm thinking about, is how do those things interplay?
Yeah.
And how do we not unintentionally create something that's burdensome to families who might already be, struggling to stay in their homes, given all the what's going on.
Yeah.
So, I'm interested in, I grew up, my mom's an architecture police person, like we would drive around and just critique architecture. So I have that in my personal history. Not to throw any shade on anybody's individual houses, but it's a mind shift to think about these other types of architecture is also worth preserving, and maybe it's for other reasons. Maybe it's because they are, relatively speaking, less expensive, and so therefore more attainable.
I think there's also something interesting. I mean, we have a long history, and actually, not to pick on 8 to 10 Chestnut, but it was in front of the planning board last week, of buildings that look like large houses that have multiple family units in them. And the reason why 8 to 10 Chestnut was in front of the planning board last week was because the new owners are hoping to convert it from a two-family into a single-family. And so I think there's also something interesting about the historic district of, is there an opportunity here to remind the village that this historic district filled with, in some respects, really large, lovely homes, a lot of those homes weren't ever meant to be single-family homes. They were meant to be two families, or they were meant to be three families. And there's a vibrant history there, and as we lose more and more of them to become single-family homes, we're not only losing an aspect of that history, but we're also losing smaller housing units that are more affordable than larger single-family homes.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if I understand Brent correctly, and the planning board can correct me here, the historic regulations refer to the exterior, not to the interior.
Right.
So how would historic preservation modify what you could do on the inside of your house?
Well, it depends on how much we want to add to these laws.
Okay, so that would be an additional piece of legislation that we would be putting in. It's not simply now about what's on your house or around your house, it's what's in your house.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we would get to bathroom level, but I think we could say if this house was historically a two-family house, then, I mean, I don't know, this would have to be discussed, right, on how we want to handle that.
I think the idea is that the public interest is from the street.
Yeah, oh yeah, well, right now,
Yes,
it's
the
just,
exterior visual thing is sort of like, where the public interest lies.
yeah, if you're walking down the street, then,
I guess the problem is I feel like we're trying to jam too many ideas into a couple of spaces, and we have one issue which is
Yeah, no,
historic
Yeah.
preservation. Another issue is affordability
Yep.
and quantity,
Yep.
and to some degrees those are going to be in competition with one another. Because generally, historic, if you're gonna keep things historic, you're not gonna create more density, you're not gonna
Well,
have
actually,
new building.
if you think about pre-1950, pre whenever we tore down all the buildings and put up parking lots, this village actually had many more buildings than we currently have. Parcel sizes were much smaller. Historic homes, for the most part, were much smaller than they are now.
It's very common. When
Yeah.
land costs go up, the townhouses go up.
Right.
Yeah.
So really what you're talking about is a rezoning of the village then.
Well, I mean, this is what the comprehensive plan committee is talking about holistically, absolutely. But what I'm talking about right here is
Okay.
resolving the conflict between our laws as a result of this,
Okay.
of this
But
2021.
I just feel like as we start to talk about affordability and all
I know,
that
but
stuff,
it's
kind of
like
over,
all-
but it's a little too much. I
It's
think.
all related.
Rick,
It's all related.
It's all related, but I think sometimes we're trying to jam too many.
I want to give an analogy for those. I built my first house in 1970. Unbelievable.
Congratulations.
And you know, you know what it was? It was a raised ranch. And you know why I built a raised ranch? In 1970, we had the affordable issue problem, and we had to build a home that was affordable to be able to live and survive. And so these homes that we're trying to wrap our hands around have significant value to how things were evolving over time. And so 1970, we had an affordable housing issue, right? I wasn't living here, but where I was living, there was affordable housing. And we built a raised ranch because we needed affordable housing. And there was a lot of raised ranches going up at that, for that particular reason. And now they're there and they have a presence, and they have a presence here, and they need to be, as Lydia said, there's this evolution through time that we need to capture.
I'm not really talking about.
And I don't want to get into the weeds of, do we change your faucet or not?
No, I'm not going there at all, But what I'm saying is, if we decide that 70s raised ranches are indeed something worth preserving, that's not really going to do anything about our affordability issue. Those houses will not be affordable.
Other than prevent those houses from getting knocked down.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're going to be affordable. I mean, supply and demand creates affordability.
That is a very good point. The only way that it's going to contribute to affordability is it prevents those houses from being knocked down and replaced with much, much larger homes.
Much more expensive.
And much more expensive.
But they're not going to be cheap.
So it depends. Some people may not want to buy half an acre that only has a 1,600 square foot home on it because
You got to define cheap.
you got to define cheap.
Yeah, you can.
Or you can expand
All
on
right,
the
we have
back
5
and
minutes.
style.
Yeah, so, I mean, this was literally just to get us onto the same page of what we're dealing with.
I like the idea of preserving these, but in the way, like, right now, we don't have a lookbook. We describe, we have a narrative that says how tall the windows should be and things like that. So we
Right.
could do a hybrid.
Yeah.
We could refer to a look. We have all sorts of references to Dutchess County planning documents already in our zoning code.
Yeah,
I don't know if, John, there's a lookbook right now that is in,
we don't have a book here. No.
that you know.
I have examples of them from other communities.
Tivoli did one,
Tivoli did one?
pattern book.
Yeah, thank you, pattern book. Thank you.
Pattern book?
Sorry.
We can refer to the pattern book for those in that 1931 to 70.
Yeah, post-war.
Excuse me one second. John, we do have guidelines though, right, that we're using today. When you get, when a historic home comes in front of a planning board,
Yeah,
or
it's, I mean,
windows
I
and
can,
doors and
It's in the
all
code.
all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, it's all there,
But it's
so.
only up to 1930.
I can.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I understand that, so what we're talking about, how do we change the code to amend that and make it more flexible?
What we can do is we can just, so this is 12039, right here. It's, this is like the list of what we have to look at. What we can do is we can just amend this section, and I can go and work with people and come back with
I mean, I'll work with you on this.
Yeah, that'd be
We
great.
can do this and then send it to Gordon when
yeah, and just come back with,
he can clean it up.
yeah, we just sort of clean up the inconsistencies and,
And we wouldn't make it go into effect until there's an actual usable pattern book.
yeah, we would find a pattern book and we would, yeah.
Well, that's an option we can choose, we
Yeah.
don't have to use the pattern book.
Right.
We have guidelines in the code, we don't, we can go down any,
We can go down whatever
This is
path we
harder.
go down.
Yeah.
We can go to,
we don't need that.
I'm assuming there are patent books out there.
Yeah, put it this way, both the Department of the Interior as well as SHPO want these kinds of districts protected, and so there are all sorts of resources out there to help us do that.
Go into an architecture book, you can see all sorts of patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah, just, I'm thinking about how do we make it, if we were to move forward with this, how do we make it user-friendly
Yeah.
for the homeowners in the expanded district?
Yeah, well, and that's the point of the Banner Cottage, it's not just for the planning board and the building planning zoning office, it's also for the homeowners and for the, you know, for the building owners, to understand what they're dealing with. You know, why is it that I can't have a window that's wider than it is tall? And, you know, why do they want all those doodads?
They don't.
Why do they want a porch? Why is it important to have a porch? So if you all are comfortable with the idea of expanding both the boundary as well as the date, you know.
Vernacular. Is that the right word?
Yeah, then I can go forth and Brent and I can work with David on, you know, a draft law on this, and we can just sort of, just clean it up. And then if the comprehensive planning committee comes back with a bunch of recommendations, then in a year when we do that zoning, we'll fix it again.
I mean, we started this process to go down that path, so why would we not?
Finish it. Yeah,
Finish it.
we started this in 2018.
Yeah, so.
You can't say that Oak Street houses shouldn't be preserved, or the ones down on Mill behind the.
Well, you know, and it's hilarious.
You
It's
know,
like,
I mean,
the minute that this was done, you know, suddenly everybody's showing up and saying, well, what about that neighborhood over there? What about, you know, Rockefeller? Like, let's see it. So it's like, it's already started. But, you know, I think the least that we can do is respond to this 2018 request from the village and the federal district and
Move it forward.
move it forward.
and it's workable, and it's not an onerous thing to just have some design criteria when you're working on the exterior of your home.
And I think the planning board would like it, right? Is that an affirmative statement, John?
We're not passing anything today, Joanne.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Diane?
Just a request that when you look at this, you're dramatically increasing the work of the planning board. So I think part of the consideration needs to be what staff needs to be added to support the additional work. And that might be a full-time zoning officer, it might be somebody sitting in the zoning meetings from the building and planning office to kind of advise, a zoning enforcement officer maybe being at those meetings.
So, yeah, I hear that on the staffing issue. The reason why the zoning enforcement officer no longer sits in on planning board meetings is because that was a bad habit developed by the previous zoning enforcement officer that's inappropriate for the person who's in charge of enforcing laws to be advising the people in charge of interpreting the laws. It's very bad practice, and we stopped it when the previous zoning enforcement officer left. And the current zoning enforcement officer is unwilling to restart it, and I'm backing him up on that. So just so you all know, that's why we no longer have the zoning enforcement officer sitting in on these meetings.
Right, but maybe it's somebody else to advise the
Yeah.
board on what they can and can't do, you know, because Brian's
Yeah, there's,
running the meeting.
I get that. I mean, the planning board always has access to their attorneys, and the question is whether or not they choose to use that. They also have access to the building inspector as well as the zoning enforcement officer whenever they want them, just not during the actual meeting. So,
And it's really just for important changes to your house, it's not for painting or, you know.
no, paint colors aren't part of it.
Gutters or roofs or anything like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Significant changes.
No, paint colors are not
A fluorescent.
We're gonna, all right, hold on, we're gonna take one more question, I think. This gentleman over here has a chance to speak all night, and we're running out of time.
Steve.
Hi, Libby.
Hi.
Just totally out of curiosity, because just listening to you,
Yeah.
there are some practicality issues that are going to come into play, I think, in terms of the preservation issues around a 72 split level home. The practicality of being able to reproduce a door from that era might be harder than something from, you know, that's wood and glass that could be produced, you know, readily.
Well,
Easily.
there's,
I'm just curious.
yeah, I mean, with all of this kind of stuff, with any kind of historic renovation, there's always, you know, finding an original at Hoffman's Barn,
Right.
fabricating it yourself, having just something made out of modern materials that looks the same.
Yeah.
So that's also part of the zoning code, is does it have to actually be made out of, virgin teak?
Yeah.
Or can it be made out of something that is duplicable?
Right.
And we'll,
That's the thing, yeah.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
If we expressly allow like composite materials and things like that, it's actually in there now,
Yeah.
so. we
How
are
about affordability, having to, have something
well, that's also
made?
the trick, right, is having modern, being able to use modern materials is cheaper. And so there's all sorts of ways to make these kinds of processes affordable. And we need to make sure that we capture that. Yeah,
All right, I'm going to call our discussion to a close.
okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.